Where did the idea come from? Were you familiar with Harlem before? Or characters like Zeus and his nephews, like where did you get the inspiration for that kind of stuff?
I just made it up. I used to go up there.
Right.
I had a car that was stolen and I ended up having to retrieve it at 137th Street, 138th. There's a big crack den up there.
Did you get your car back?
No, it was on cinder blocks when I got it.
Do you ever kind of go to locations before you start writing? Do you ever kind of scout locations just for your own process as a writer before you start writing?
Yeah, I think it's really valuable, and I think that you just get a lot of gist, a lot of stuff, a lot of it always helps to visualize, obviously, yeah.
In adapting your work to fit the Die Hard model, did you have to kind of come up with any backstory for McClane's missing years or how he ended up in that police wagon drunk? Or?
Yes, what Simon Says is a picture about a cop who wakes up in the morning and someone's trying to kill him, and he doesn't know why. And in fact, I could make Simon Says as its original incarnation right now because we did enough to change it, to make it into Die Hard. But he wakes up, he doesn't know why someone's trying to kill him. The course of the picture, that's his journey, is trying to find out why someone's trying to kill him. So we needed to fit this into the Die Hard mold, and I got this idea in the shower where a lot of my ideas come, and I called up McTiernan and I said, are you willing to make a sequel to your first film and kind of leave the second Die Hard out of it? Would you accept that the guy trying to kill John McClane at the beginning of the picture is the brother of the guy McClane killed in Die Hard 1? And he loved that idea, and off to the races.
Okay. And now, was there ever any flack over the injection of kind of race into that set piece, or?
No, that's why Bruce Willis wanted to make it. That's why McTiernan wanted to make it, and Fox had been trying to look for the third vehicle for so long that they just said, fellas, whatever you want, go for,
And I imagine since the picture was a great success, test screenings probably didn't. It doesn't seem to offend anyone because it's. I think it's used in a very proper way. But can you elaborate on your own thoughts about why it kind of doesn't offend anybody and works in the context?
Yeah, we all asked ourselves, look, it is, when black people use it, African Americans use it to describe each other all the time in the normal course of conversation. That is not a controversial statement. When white people use it, of course, it is about as offensive as it gets. And I understand why, and I have no problem with that. The reason why it's probably why black people are not offended by it is because the white guy is forced to wear the sign. It's not a volitional act on his part. This psycho motherfucker is requiring him to do it, and thus the black audiences, their ire is directed toward the psycho, not John McClane.
I saw it in a theater in New York, and once the sign was glimpsed, you just heard it like kind of the appropriate giggle from the audience, like, oh shit, it's gonna hit the fan now.
Yeah.
But then you immediately establish the decency of the Zeus character because the way Samuel Jackson comes to his aid, the decency of the character is established for the rest of the movie. You just kind of know who he is right there.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, the scene worked. We were all a little bit on eggshells, about it. We didn't really know quite what was going to happen in the first test screening, and I wanted, of course, the preservation as is of the scene, and I was worried that the test screening audience was going to have some sort of virulent reaction, then there'd be a recutting at the beginning of the film, etc. McTiernan was terrified about it, but it went exceedingly well with a densely urban audience. So,
was the gun taped to his back in homage to the original film?
You bet.
And did you feel like planting kind of an Easter egg like that was important for the fans of the series? It's just kind of a nod to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's enjoyable. I mean, when, people like that kind of internal reference.
Right.
With sequels.
Yeah.
It's just something that you should gravitate toward rather than run from. And the inclusion of things like that, devices like that in sequels can be extremely ham-fisted if you try too hard.
Right.
If they're deft, it's great.
It's wonderful.
It's wonderful. It's a fine line, though.
Right. Throughout the film, you kind of managed to pull off what a lot of action films can't pull off, is the injection of a serious subject matter like race, kind of as a subtext. And how did you kind of weave, because they kind of do that all through the movie, John McClane and the Zeus character kind of get into it a little bit about race. Was that something that you and McTiernan set out to do? Did it come from
That was all
the
Simon,
actors?
that was all Simon Says. I mean, it was
It was all in the original
It was
Simon
all
Says
in the
one.
original screenplay. It was the whole thing about it was cop wakes up in the morning, psychopath is trying to kill him. Psychopath requires cop to stand on the corner of 138th Street. African American intervenes. Psychopath then includes African American with the cop in his sociopathic plans, and they're required to do his bidding for the rest of the day. So all of that was in that original script, and so yes, we all knew that the issues involved during that fateful day between the Zeus Carver character and the John McClane character had to involve intense racial issues.
Because it's reality.
Exactly, and to try, yeah, well, that was the biggest problem of the execution of that script, to get a wide demographic action picture, enjoyable for most people, to include that kind of intensity and offensive language and everything, and not have it come off as heavy or.
Right. Did you have any concerns about writing the Zeus character, or writing for a black character, or how did you kind of capture that voice? Or I imagine Samuel Jackson brought a lot to it.
He did, and I can't write for an African American actor, really. I'm about as white as it gets. I have lived in urban areas all my life. I've heard the street patois. If I were hard pressed with a gun to my head, I could probably sit down and attempt it. I think it's I think it's foolhardy to try to do that. The best way to do that, and this is advice for any young writer, is to just write it neutrally and to cast someone who comes from that background and let them fiddle with your own dialogue and not be precious about it. So if I wanted to write a character for a guy in his 40s from Arkansas, I'd cast Billy Bob Thornton like that, because Billy Bob could come in and give it a whole world of legitimacy and phraseology, etc. That if I were to attempt, I'd make the character look like a fucking idiot or totally false.
Yeah, it is kind of condescending in a way. I do come across screenplays sometimes where people try to write in whatever ethnic group the character belongs to on the page, and it kind of, there's something about it that doesn't really, it feels very condescending in a way.
It is, it's horrible. And we have a culture now where there's a lot of white kids in the suburbs running around trying to do this black speak, or it's that whole hip-hopization of youth culture. And I've just now started seeing a great deal of that creeping into screenplays that I've read. I think it's a mistake, but I think you cast African Americans and let them run with it.
What's your approach when you're developing action scenes? Because you've been behind some of the biggest ones, ever filmed. Like, do you have a separate approach to the crafting of those or the writing of those than conversational scenes, or is it all part and parcel of the same process?
It's a hard question to answer, Michael, but I'll try to give you some insight.
Okay.
I have one rule for it, and as I answer in the abstract, the answer is quite easy to deliver. It's the execution of what I'm talking about that's really difficult. My abstract answer is the following: always try to have the physical action play into character. I'll just give you the stupidest, rudimentary examples of this.
Okay.
You can choose to have a chase take place on the ground or on the top of several buildings, across rooftops, okay? If your character is acrophobic, where do you put your character? Not on the ground. You put him on the rooftops, clearly. If your character has improperly killed someone, he's a cop, and he's killed somebody in the line of fire, in the line of duty, and he's been censured for that, okay? Obviously put him in a situation where he's once again going to be faced with having to use his firearm in a sketchy situation where he might have to discharge it and might not know who the perpetrator is and might hit an innocent bystander, what have you. But you always try to concoct situations which play into character notions rather than just starting abstractly from this point where I see a lot of young writers, their threshold is, ooh, wouldn't it be cool?
Right.
In other words, say, wouldn't it be cool if the streetcar came off its tracks and went down the side of the street and went through the building into the office park, and all these people dove away, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one would ask, well, what the fuck does that have to do with the characters involved in the piece?
Right.
But I'll leave it at that. That's my one rule for action sequences, is try to concoct it around the characters' strengths, phobias, fears, weaknesses, et cetera.
Do you feel? I feel like that's lacking in a lot of contemporary action films. I feel like I love the genre, and I do go every opening weekend, and I do get fed a lot of just kind of like, big explosions, but not a lot of character development. Do you see more of that trend, or do you think it's just me being grandpa complaining about Elvis music again?
Well, once again, I'll resist any notion that you and I are grandpas.
I was speaking for myself.
No, it's. Look, I'll say what I think needs to be said at this point in the industry. And I think that just concocting these willy-nilly action sequences that aren't rooted down in character is not, it has nothing to do with fashionableness or what is au courant or vogue or whatever. It's just a bad way of doing it. It was bad in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, et cetera. It's bad now. And if you just look at any of the action sequences that work really well, I mean, for instance, The Rock. When I was coming up with all of the physical action in The Rock between Sean Connery and Nick Cage on the one hand, and the Ed Harris character as the Marine on the island, I had 10 voices in my ears, right? The producer,
Sure.
the director. Well, why don't they do this? And what is it? Et cetera, et cetera. They could do this, and this could happen. And what I tried to, what I was playing as a broken record, what was coming out of my mouth throughout the entire development is every single piece of physical action has to accomplish the following. It has to show Connery as the old lion who's capable of doing anything and has the training to do it, and Nick Cage is this lab rat who is utterly out of his element. And if you look at the picture, that's every single moment. That dynamic is up front and center. Mm-hmm. That Connery is leading the way, and Nick Cage is insecure, fumbling, out of his element,
right.
Keeping up.
You had Nick Cage right up front with the poison gas, being afraid of it, and then you put his face in it right at the end. You knew there was going to be a setup and a payoff because his character followed a logic, Connery followed a logic.
Correct. Good point. Cage in that his character, Goodspeed, has one advantage over the Connery character. That is when he's around poison, when he's around in his bailiwick, mm-hmm. then he is the man of the hour. And yes, that rule is followed all the way through, and it's a good action picture because of that.
Now, Simon Says got kind of retooled into Die Hard 3, but do you have specs or other screenplays that you've written that are on hold or kind of languishing in development? And are there any that are particularly frustrating? Or
well, I have. Mad Dogs and Englishman I've continued to rewrite, and I still love that script. And it's
what's that about?
I grew up in Europe. I was born in Paris, and I grew up in England and the United States. So one writes what one knows. And it was my first script that sold, that was optioned here in Hollywood. And it's about an American cop and a British cop. So it is dated. It is a buddy cop movie. And it comes, I think, from that whole area of films that was from about 1980 to 92 or 3. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there's a taste for it, but I continue to work on it. I love the script. I love the characters.
Do you think you'd direct that someday?
Yeah, if there's a will to make it and cash to make it, yeah.
What do you think the best thing is that you've written?
I would say either my shooting draft of The Rock or the script that was not made, the last script that I submitted to Paramount Studios for The Saint. But that script was then entirely reconceived and rewritten. I got credit on it, but once Val Kilmer came into the title role, he had notions about the character, and other writers were engaged to rewrite the script. So not really anything of that script that I submitted to Paramount made its way to the screen. The basic plot kind of, but all my writing was character writing for the Simon Templar character, and very little of it reached the screen.
I imagine that must be a frustrating experience.
Yes, that's a bit of an understatement, Michael.
At what point did it kind of, was it at the attachment of the actor or the director or the studio, or all three that kind of pulled it away from the original draft? Or is that just kind of the nature of the business where writers are just, you take your best shot and you hope that doesn't happen?
Well, yeah, and I'm not gonna denigrate Val Kilmer.
Sure.
Val Kilmer came onto the project. He had a different notion of the character he wanted to play.
He had actually departed the Batman franchise to do the Saint.
That's correct. And he had a different notion of the way the character should go, and my script was altered.
Right.
And if I were to fault anyone, I would suppose I would fault the studio for caving. I would have preferred the studio to say to Val Kilmer, you've agreed to portray this character according to the script which we've been developing, and if you don't like it, you should do another role. That's a bit unrealistic on my part.
Right. Any others out there that are kind of stuck that you want to get moving?
No. I'm writing two things now. Originally, I've gone back to, I've been kind of dicking around. I think my energy level has not been high. I had a script at Paramount. I was when Donald DeLine was president of production of Paramount, I was going to make a remake of the Charlton Heston picture, The Naked Jungle, which is based on the short story Languishing and the Ants, about this South American plantation owner who has to defend his plantation against this huge swarm of army marching ants.
Yeah, I actually have the old radio show broadcast of that story.
Well, amazing, and we should talk about it after the taping of this show about how to get that thing going again, because when the regime change happened at Paramount, there was not the will to make it any longer. They own the original Naked Jungle, so I can't take it to another studio. But it's still alive there at Paramount, and I hope that we get it going soon. So I'm waiting for that to happen. I'm waiting for the sequel to The Punisher, and I'm writing two things myself. So.
Would you be directing the sequel to The Punisher as well as the original? If
there's a proper budget, I know that. I mean, Thomas Jane and I are still talking about doing it, and I'd love to.
In your career, you've dealt with a lot of constraints that other writers don't face, because you've dealt with, brands like Marvel that have very set, I guess, rules about how you deal with their characters, and you've dealt with, big-time producers like George Lucas and Jerry Bruckheimer. But do you find that how is dealing with those kind of, constraints, or just, those kind of people differ from just something when you're writing something on your own? Is it?
Well, it's a tough question. I mean, on the one hand, it's a good experience because they have the clout
to get it done.
To get it done, and you sit there not filled with anxiety about all of your effort going in the shit can.
Right.
Which is a constant problem for screenwriters, laboring alone at 3 o'clock in the morning, having to fight the insecurity that all of your effort is never going to see the screen. It's a real psychological problem, believe me.
Right.
You feel like you're digging a ditch and then filling the ditch in and digging it out again and filling it in. So with someone like a George Lucas or a Bruckheimer or the Titanic producers in town, you're going to get a screen credit. You're going to show up at a premiere, seeing actors deliver your lines. You might not agree with the way everything was executed, but at least a picture is going to be made.
Right.
So there are advantages, and those guys have treated me very, very well. They've kept me involved in the process, and I have no complaints. I would much prefer to do that than work with kind of a producer who's never had a movie produced at a studio.
So we've got a little screenwriting exercise for you. We call it the object. Frederick, the tray, please. Now, the goal here is for you to examine this object chosen by random, by us, and tell me its story, and then tell me how you arrived at its story. Present the gentleman with his object.
Your object, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. How are you today?
Oh, excellent, sir.
That'll be all, Frederick. What do you think?
The first event occurs right after the first of the year, and the events are anomalies that are picked up by the facility at Cheyenne Mountain. And there are all of the armed, for people who don't understand Cheyenne Mountain or know what it is, it's the top secret facility in the Rocky Mountains where
NORAD?
Where NORAD is based, and where the United States can launch its nuclear arsenal, et cetera. And coming into Cheyenne Mountain are readings of great seismic activity throughout the United States. And the president is informed, and the Joint Chiefs are called because the amount of seismic activity and its dispersion is of great alarm, is cause of great alarm. Because not only is the seismic activity occurring in the West Coast, along the traditional fault line in the West Coast, but it's also happening in the midsection of the country and on the East Coast where there are no fault lines, et cetera. And the seismic activity increases to the point where a week later, there are a series of 8.0 earthquakes all across the country, mostly in rural areas, so it doesn't cause the devastation of huge urban areas, but enormous fissures start cutting across America's landscape. And they then do a radar survey of the fissures, and they find that there are enormous subterranean caves underneath the United States. And they do a radar, again, a ground-penetrating radar survey that then shows these cavities extending 100 to 150 miles down through the crust and into the mantle of the Earth. The Joint Chiefs decide that the best way to find out what the hell is going on is to send down a team of Navy SEALs to try to find out what the fuck is going on down there. And they descend approximately a half a mile down below the center of the, below the surface of the Earth, and they come across a series of caves. And inside the caves, they find bones, and the bones of man-like creatures, and they send those for carbon dating. And they find that some of the carbon dates come back 2,000 years old. They find one that dates to 3 million years old. And this is a Cro-Magnon or Homo sapien. And this is a great, stunning revelation to the United States authorities, because the scientific community, if asked, would tell you that we've only been around for 50,000 years. They make a second mission down into this series of caves, and the SEAL team moving through the cave system is suddenly attacked by an anthropomorphic type group of warriors. Most of them are killed, and the 2 remaining SEAL team members are heroes, find that wend their way through this warren of caves and come into what appears to be an altar, and drawing closer and closer and closer to the altar, which looks like a place of worship, they come on, and as we slowly push in, we find this.
That's pretty good. Now, how did you pick that story for that object?
I don't know.
What kind of went into your process there? Just the most unlikely lead up to to that you could think of?
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I was riveted there. I want to hear the rest of the story. What do they do with the shoe?
I don't know. I don't know, Mike.
We'll cover that some other time. But
It's actually a pretty good story, isn't it?
it's a great story, yeah.
You want to pitch it to Sony?
Not without an ending.